Hey guys, welcome back to more HOA stories. In this video, homeowner association cops installed spike strips on my private property to destroy my vehicle. This was completely illegal and I honestly don't know what to do. Let's dive right into the video. And the first one is an outrageous HOA story from r/amIthejerk. It is titled, "Am I the jerk for deliberately breaking HOA rules after they tried to illegally seize my house?" So I, 43 male, inherited my childhood home from my parents about 5 years ago. The house had been in our family since 1975 when my parents first built it. Back then, it was pretty much just open land around us, but over the years, developers started buying up all the surrounding properties. Well then, about 15 years ago, they built this fancy gated community called Karen Estates right next to our property line. The problem started almost immediately after I moved in. At first, it was just annoying letters in my mailbox about the unkept lawn and how my house paint did not conform to community standards. I mostly just laughed these off since I knew my property was not part of their HOA. I had the original deed and property maps to prove it, but things started getting more aggressive over time. One Saturday morning, I was doing some yard work when this woman in a powder blue pantsuit marched up to my fence. She introduced herself as Patricia, the HOA board president. "Mr. Mitchell," she said in this condescending tone, "we have sent you multiple notices about violations of our community guidelines. Your continued non-compliance is becoming a serious issue." I wiped the sweat from my forehead and leaned on my rake. "Ma'am, I don't mean to be rude, but my property is not even part of your HOA. Never has been, by the way." She gave me this tight little smile that did not reach her eyes. "I'm afraid you're mistaken. All properties in this area fall under our jurisdiction. We will need you to bring your property up to code within 30 days or you will face fines." I tried to stay polite and said, "Look, I have the original deed here and even property maps. This house was here decades before your community was built. You can check with the county assessor's office if you don't believe me." "We will see about that," she sniffed before turning on her heels and clicking away in her kitten heels. The letters kept coming though, now with increasingly larger fine amounts attached. $100 for my non-regulation mailbox, $250 for my excessive garden ornaments. I had exactly 3 garden gnomes inherited from my mom, $500 for my so-called unauthorized fence color. It was just regular brown wood. I kept all the letters in a file, but I otherwise ignored them. Then things got really crazy. They started sending people to take pictures of my house. I would catch them standing on the sidewalk with their phones out documenting my supposed violations. One guy even tried to climb my fence to get photos of my backyard. But the breaking point came when I received a certified letter from their lawyer. They were threatening to put a lien on my house and initiate foreclosure proceedings for failure to pay accumulated HOA fines totaling $13,750. I'll admit that got my attention. I immediately contacted the real estate lawyer who specialized in HOA disputes. When I showed her my documentation and explained the situation, she actually laughed. "This is the most clear-cut case of HOA overreach I've seen in years," she said, spreading out my papers on her desk. "They don't have a leg to stand on. Your property predates their development by decades, and there's no record of it ever being incorporated into their HOA. What they are doing could be considered harassment too." She helped me prepare a response to their lawyer, including copies of the original deed, property maps and county records clearly showing my property was not part of their development. We also included a cease and desist letter regarding the harassment. Did that stop them though? Nope. They actually filed a lawsuit trying to force me to join their HOA and pay all the accumulated fines. When we got to court, their lawyer tried to argue that because my property was surrounded on 3 sides by HOA properties, it wasn't by the way, only 2 sides bordered their community, it should automatically be considered part of their jurisdiction. The judge was not having any of it though. He took one look at my documentation and dismissed their case with prejudice. He also found them guilty of harassment and ordered them to pay my legal fees plus $5,000 in damages for their frivolous and vexatious litigation. Now this is where I might be the a-hole. After winning the case, I decided to exercise my freedom from their rules in the most visible ways possible. I painted my house a bright yellow color that would have given Patricia an aneurysm, and I added a dozen more garden gnomes, all in different poses and outfits. I also put up string lights all around my property, the multicolored kind, not their approved warm white only variety. The coup de grace was when I parked my project car, a 1987 Camaro that needed some work, right in my front yard. According to their rules, no vehicle repairs were allowed in visible areas and cars had to be parked in garages or driveways. Well, let me just say, I spent every weekend out there working on that car, music playing, and having a great time. Patricia would drive by slowly in her Mercedes, glaring at me like I had personally offended her ancestors. Other HOA board members would walk past, shaking their heads disapprovingly, but there was not a damn thing they could do about it. I kept this up for about 6 months until I finally moved. I got a job offer in another state that I could not refuse. So I sold the house to a lovely young couple who knew exactly what they were getting into, meaning a property free from HOA control. Last I heard, they've added a vegetable garden in the front yard and painted their door hot pink. So Reddit, am I the jerk for deliberately antagonizing the HOA after they tried to illegally seize my house? Comment number 1, not the a-hole, they tried to steal your house. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. And yeah guys, let me know what you think about this in the comments. Do you think OP was the a-hole here, or would you have done the same? I gotta say already, I completely agree with the play stupid games, win stupid prizes comment. A second comment said, everyone sucks here, the HOA was definitely wrong for trying to force you to join and threatening to take your house, that is inexcusable, but your response was immature and petty. You could have just gone about your life normally after winning in court. Instead, you chose to escalate things by deliberately making your property as offensive as possible. 2 wrongs don't make a right. Comment number 3, you're the a-hole. As someone who lives in an HOA community, I understand why they were concerned. Property values matter, and having one house that stands out like a sore thumb affects everyone. Yes, they went about it the wrong way, but your juvenile response probably cost your neighbors thousands in property value depreciation. You basically punished innocent people to get revenge on the HOA board. And yeah guys, clearly we found the HOA Karen in the comments. Either way, the next one is titled Fraudulent HOA Cops Installed Spike Strips on My Private Rural Farm Road. So this might come as a surprise for you all, but I'm a farm owner. I'm currently living off the road of one of my state's more major freeways. It is a long way from any city, town or suburban area, or at least it was until recently, but we will talk about that later. And basically the farmland, although not the biggest, is pretty large. It's not one of those industrial farms that you might see on road trips with big open fields. All my produce goes to the local grocery store, but that's about it. I really don't see a lot of people out here, and I focus on my farm work mostly, usually spending my days tending to my animals and my crops. It's sometimes a lonely life, but I love it. Recently, my isolated farm has not become so isolated anymore. So about a mile out from my farm, a new suburban area has been built. The place was actually constructed relatively fast. They started about a year ago and just finished it this summer. I've visited a couple times, it's a pretty decently sized neighborhood and the people seem friendly. I actually see some of the new residents at the farmers market I attend every Sunday and they are pretty nice people. However, with the new neighborhood has come an HOA. Of course, there's absolutely no reason why I should care about this. Why would I, right? I'm not part of their neighborhood, however, they seem to think the opposite. Around 2 months ago, I started receiving HOA-related mail, including membership forms, informational packets, and updates about things going on in the neighborhood, as if I am part of this HOA. Obviously, I ignored and trashed all of these materials because it did not even concern me. It was a good thing that I did not join too. This HOA was even crazier than most that you would hear about usually. So normally, HOAs and their harassment usually consist of members, employees or board officers trying to stick the HOA policies down your throat. This one went as far as to have cops. I say cops in quotations because I don't think they were real cops. They had no insignia on their uniforms, but they wore mostly all black and were most definitely working on behalf of the HOA, more on that in a bit. Honestly, it seemed like the HOA just hired a bunch of bullies looking for money and a power trip to do their dirty work. I'd always see these fake cops walking around the entrance to my farm. I never engaged with them, and every time they saw me, they just left. I did not really think anything of it, as it is common for people to be lingering outside my property. Most of the time though, these are just curious passers-by or people who are interested in the farmers market. So then last month I was doing work on my crops, so I was driving my vehicle around. I have a main road that snakes through my farm towards my homestead, and while I was driving on it, my vehicle started acting weird. I stopped my vehicle to check it out, and it turned out that the wheels were popped by a spike strip. Thankfully, these wheels are pretty tough, so the damage was not too bad. It was just deflating and causing my vehicle to swerve a bit, but still, I was pissed. Someone had obviously placed it on purpose and trespassed on my property to do so. I had security cameras placed all over the property, but since it is farmland, it's obviously hard to have cameras in every nook and cranny. I was then approached by those wannabe cops I mentioned earlier, despite not having called the cops or led them onto my property. Because of this, when they arrived, I immediately knew that they were involved with this. It was no coincidence, in my opinion. I asked who they were and what they were doing on my property. I was trying my best to not be aggressive, but I was so upset about the damage done to my vehicle that it probably came out angry. They introduced themselves as representatives of the local HOA and that they were on my farmland on behalf of a complaint about the noise level of my farm vehicles. When I asked why exactly that concerned me, they said that the vehicles were violating the HOA's noise ordinances, whatever that meant. I might be biased, but I honestly did not think that my vehicles were making that much noise anyway. I mean, I get it, farm vehicles are loud, I work with them every day, so of course I know, but the neighborhood, as I said, is a mile from my farm. Even at its most excruciatingly high volume level, there was no way that my vehicles would be that disturbing, so much so that it required a check-in from the HOA. Even if that was the problem, the fact that they decided to illegally pop my tires instead of confronting me about it says a lot. Because of this revelation, I wanted to ask them about the spike strip and if they had anything to do with it. However, I didn't, as it would have been an aggressive accusation and I knew these guys would get riled up. This is what I said to them instead. I'm sorry about my farm vehicles, but that is the work I do here and that's my livelihood. Besides, I'm not even a member of the HOA, so why do your neighborhood rules even concern me? The road you're standing on, by the way, is part of private property. HOA or not, you have no right to stand here without my permission. I then even questioned if they were really cops, pointing out that I didn't see the city's logo or any insignia on them. I was honestly more sassy and aggressive than I needed to be, but I was super angry. When I asked if the uniforms were even legal, the cops exploded, which was probably my fault, and the cops said that I could get in great trouble for talking to them like that and that I ought to show them a little more respect. They demanded that I pay a fine for the noise violations and for the service of the spike strip installation on my road, to my absolute shock. They kept threatening to arrest me if I did not pay, as if they even had the authority to do that. I argued back that I never asked for the spike strip installation and that they had done it on my private property illegally. We kept arguing back and forth for a bit, but the cops were relentlessly stubborn, refusing to believe that they were in the wrong. Eventually, I got tired of running around in circles with them, knowing that arguing was futile. I began to ignore them and started removing the strips in front of them. I made sure to take pictures before I did it and recorded the entire thing so I could have evidence. The cops started freaking out and called the police. I honestly was not afraid of that, so I asked what exactly they were calling for. They were screaming about how I had vandalized HOA property, threatened them, and disobeyed orders. This honestly just had to be the stupidest move on their part. Even if I had vandalized their property and threatened them, they were arguably committing far worse crimes. Like trespassing on private property, impersonating law enforcement. I don't know what they thought this would do, it certainly didn't scare me. In fact, I was excited to see the police arrive. I knew these guys were gonna get what they deserved, and when the police arrived, the HOA cops made their claims. When they mentioned that I was disobeying orders, the police seemed confused, so they took me aside and I explained my side of the story. I first told them that I was the owner of the farm, and I even offered to show them my proof of ownership, but thankfully they believed me. I explained to them that the nearby neighborhood has an HOA and that the cops were working for them, trying to claim my farm as part of the HOA and trying to get me to pay for the spike strip that they installed themselves on my property. The police were absolutely shocked at the sheer audacity of these so-called cops and were even amused by their uniforms. After hearing my side of the story, the police told the HOA cops that they were trespassing and as such, they had to leave. One of the cops also pointed out the uniforms and what he said was hilarious, so I have to include it here. Also, these cheap Halloween costumes are not fooling anyone, so do us all a favor and take them off when you get back. The police then told them that they would let them off with a warning only once, and if they did it again, they would have to pursue legal action. The HOA cops tried arguing, making desperate claims about their property, but the real police dismissed them and reiterated that they needed to leave. The HOA cops finally relented, leaving my farm. I then put duct tape over the holes in my vehicle's wheels and I was able to get my car back to the barn without an issue. However, I did not have another spare tire, so I had to put in an order to get my vehicle's wheels replaced, which put a hold on my farm work. And of course, my farm work is my source of income. Although the repairs would only take a day or so, that was one less day where I could work. Besides, that would be more money out of my pocket to repair the tires. Because of this, I decided to pursue legal action with the HOA. First, however, I contacted the authorities. I wanted to make sure I was in my rights here to do this, but I also wanted to see if we could get them in trouble for impersonating law enforcement and the fake uniforms. Luckily, the authorities were on my side. Apparently, people in the neighborhood had been complaining about the HOA and their fake cops too, so I had more than enough jurisdiction to make my case. I don't make a lot of money usually, but luckily I have a trust fund from my grandfather that can cover a pretty decent lawyer. You might think it's a bit much for such a small deal, but I knew the HOA would cause everyone even more problems in the long run. If farming has taught me anything, it's always better to nip a problem in the bud before it causes more issues down the line. Plus, I wanted to get a good lawyer as I knew the HOA would have their own lawyer and, knowing HOAs, it would be a pretty pricey one. After finding a good lawyer, I filed the lawsuit. I explained everything to the judge, from my property's separation from the neighborhood and my non-existent membership to the HOA, to the harassment of the fake cops and even the spike strips. The police were a great help. They were able to help support my case by providing evidence of the HOA using people impersonating cops for intimidation and of the HOA trespassing onto my home and causing damage to my property instead of the other way around. I also provided video evidence from my camera, so it's physical proof that they trespassed other than just word of mouth. The judge ruled in my favor easily and made the HOA pay for damages. The story started going around the neighborhood that they were based in, and I've heard that a lot of members have left the HOA and started filing their own complaints, which is great to hear. I'm glad that I was able to expose the HOA for their mistreatment, even though it was not really my problem to begin with. All in all, I'm just happy that I get to live my life in peace on my farm. And the next one is titled Sound Revenge for Karen. This happened years ago, but I thought of it this morning and figured I would share it. When I first had my baby, I was living in a cheap upstairs apartment. It did not have the best insulation. I could hear my downstairs neighbors open and close their sliding door closet in the mornings, and well, these people just had no awareness of communal living. Any sound I made was a complaint to management. Soda bottle falls out of the fridge? Call to management. Cupboard door falls off the hinge without me touching it? Call to management once again. Drop the baby toy? Call to management. My friends had to tiptoe up my stairs, or else the neighbors called to complain. Needless to say, I couldn't continue living there, so I made arrangements, turned in my notice and began packing. And if they thought I was loud before, well, I was already sleep deprived, so I just went with it. Stomping in my living room in the middle of the night packing, tossing the packing tape into the air every time I was done to let it thump a little louder onto the floor. The cheap knockdown furniture that I was tossing had my baby go to a friend's home one night and got out the power drills to take everything apart and thump the pieces hard on the kitchen floor. Just so you know, linoleum is louder than carpet. I dragged this on for a good 2 weeks before having my guy friends come at 11 PM in steel-toed boots to move everything out. Petty? Yes, but it was so satisfying. And before we end the video, I will read one last funny story from r/petty revenge that you have not heard before. It is titled The Day I Was Invisible. So years ago I worked at a public school. The district assigned us a temporary administrator, a man who knew what was wrong with everyone and everything and just how to fix it all. He drove us up the wall and I spent his entire time with us making bets on who would be first to cram him into a locker. One thing he hated was how other people would go to deal with things, leaving the command center, aka the office, instead of commanding. One day he walked into the office and the receptionist was in the restroom, the principal was in a meeting and the office manager had gone to look at something. I, the registrar, was working head down at my desk. That man walked into the middle of the room and announced on the radio to 15 people, criticizing all of them, including the principal in her meeting, "This office is completely empty. What if a parent walked in?" He was 5 feet from me. I picked up my radio and said to him and 15 other people, "Mister, I'm right here. Hey, your glasses are on your head, sir." Small, but very satisfying. And yeah guys, thank you so much for watching. I will see you again tomorrow.